Yeah.
2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. I must say, it is our birthday week, and as part of the celebration, we will be with Bradley Bozeman talking about anti-bullying and other stuff, including swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry. That'll happen on Tuesday night, the 15th. Greenmount Station will be up in Hampstead having delicious crab cakes. I got a guy here who was, he's promised to bring me indigestion along with some chili for my birthday if the Bengals were to beat the Ravens on Sunday. But stranger things have happened. He has covered the Cincinnati Bengals through the good times, the better times, and now the bad times. He's now at The Athletic. He's a senior writer, podcast host for all things Who Day. He is Paul Dehner Jr. Paul, welcome in. I must say it's my birthday this weekend. I remember Steve Smith wrecking one of my birthdays when he was a Carolina Panther, and I remember, Jim Harbaugh wrecked one of my birthdays as an Indianapolis Colt back in the 90s. So I don't know, man. Is there life after Marvin? I mean, in Cincinnati right now? Because it certainly feels a little weird for me to not be like talking to Marvin about when he's going to stop coaching there, because I've been doing that for like 12 years.
Yeah. They certainly hope that there's life after Marvin. I mean, right now it's not a very good one, but it is. It's still pretty early. There's still a lot of change going on. So it's a bad start. I don't think. You know what? And a lot of people talk about, a team starts 0-5. Oh, well, they're rebuilding. This staff didn't really come in viewing this as a rebuild job. I mean, they didn't. They thought that there were the pieces that you could win quickly here.
They thought they could win 8 games this year. Yeah, I mean, they didn't think they could win 12.
I think they thought they could win more than that.
Wow,
I mean,
okay.
And so to start this way, I think has been sobering. I think has been a big reality check. And I think it shows how maybe exposed. Whereas before there was, Marvin became the fall guy, right? I mean, that was the reason they weren't winning. Whereas I think it sort of exposed this as, maybe your roster wasn't good enough, and because now you've got more losing happening with new coaches and what looks like just not enough talent and a lopsided. There's just so many things wrong right now. That it's hard to even put them all into the time that we have allotted.
Well, okay, so, and I guess before we get anywhere, because we'll get to the team and the injuries and the O-line and, all of the Ravens' woes, all of the AFC North, but we'll get to all of that. But let's get on to Marvin, because, I mean, sort of the deeper dig is, of my deep affection relationship. We've kidded around about it and sourced information and this and that and whatnot. And Marvin, I had on about 2 weeks ago when Brian went into the Ring of Honor. He's out in Arizona State doing his thing. Marvin was always blamed for the losing. Marvin was never sort of lauded for turning something that never was into something that was, and now. And look, I went through this when Billick was abruptly shown the gate, right? We all thought Ozzie was a genius. Maybe it was Phil Savage. Maybe it's DaCosta. Maybe it was the process, as Ozzie always liked to say here through all the years. But there was a question of, can this special teams guy from Andy Reid's staff, and even Bisciotti said, I might be on my third coach, after Brian, trying to figure this out. Now, obviously, 13 years later and a Super Bowl and where Harbaugh stands. But in Cincinnati, there is none of that, right? And there is, the jury's out, and the organization never really built even into, this place where it was always sold out. And Marvin was just there, and they never won that playoff game, right? So now he's gone.
Hold on. I will say that there's a lot of points that I want to.
Sure, have at it. How about all of it?
Let's unpack what you're saying a little bit. I will disagree. I think that Marvin has absolutely 100% been lauded for turning nothing into something. Everyone across the city understands where this franchise was and where he took it to make them relevant. I always said I thought maybe Marvin's greatest legacy outside of the work he did in the community here was the fact that what he was doing was now deemed not good enough. Okay, the fact that winning division titles and playing in playoff games was suddenly not good enough from the coach here is a testament to what Marvin did do. because
That's
that
sort of an
was stuff that
SEC
in the
mindset,
90s
right?
they would have died for. What's
Yeah,
that?
well, it's an SEC mindset. When Tennessee goes 9-2, it's not good enough, right? Like that's
Right.
SEC football. You got to win. You got to be undefeated. You got to be Alabama.
I think Marvin got got absolutely got that respect from the city. But it was, it became a thing where everything got stale. And like it does anywhere. I mean, everybody gets stale after a while. And when you don't win the playoff game, that was the thing. It was. If there would have been one run, if in '05 Carson Palmer's knee doesn't get buckled in by Keno von Oelhoffen, or if in 2015 Andy Dalton doesn't break his thumb against Pittsburgh at the end of the season, the two best teams ended in his quarterback not playing in the playoff game. If maybe he's still here and he's viewed very differently. Maybe they won a playoff game or two, but that playoff game thing held over him, held over this franchise, and held everybody in the city back from connecting with the team. And that was part of it. That was the disconnect with the fan base in just demanding something different because they weren't making the playoff runs.
And I'm not disputing any of that. I guess what I'm saying in retrospect now is you might be on your third coach 6 years from now, hanging up a couple of 4-12s and burning down the bridge like Miami is, or the Jets, or some of these other places, or the perennial sort of Buffalo and never getting there. That's very easy to do in this league. It's really hard to do what Marvin did. It's really hard to do what Mike Tomlin has done, right? And now they're going to go off the cliff and win whatever 3, 4, 5 games they're going to win this year. And I think it is different when you're doing it with Zach. It's different when you're doing it with the next guy and saying, all right, so it is bad. We're going to be 3 and whatever, 4 and whatever. We're going to make a draft pick. In the case of the Steelers, they don't have a draft pick to make now, right? So, there's teams like Miami stockpiling all of that to come back. And then the Cleveland Browns come in here and wax us last week, and we're like, well, the times have changed here, and Harbaugh survived this thing last year, right? At least for the time being, if Lamar Jackson could play. Marvin survived a lot there. I don't know what Cincinnati change looks like, but over the next hill, this year, next year, doesn't look like it's going to get good real soon, right, for the Bengals.
No, I mean, I think everything essentially will probably hinge on who they select. It's assuming this team ends up where they're tracking toward, picking in the top 3 or so. They're going to pick their quarterback of the future, and that pick. This is kind of a crazy big picture thought, and and we talk about this a lot in the city. I'm sure outsiders maybe don't even realize this. That pick could decide whether the Bengals stay in Cincinnati long term.
Whoa. So I got a baseball thing here, right, where the baseball team has 2 years left on the lease. The owner's running away. If you saw the quote 2 weeks ago, it's because I hijacked the Visit Baltimore tourism press conference to ask, like, hey, dude, what's up with the lease? You know what I mean? Like, and you guys have been through the ringer. I mean, when we stole the Browns, you guys were on deck, apparently, from all I've heard,
Yeah, no, that was absolutely the case. Yeah, no, well, because the lease here is up in 2026, but there's renegotiation. They've been renegotiating the lease a lot lately because they're redoing some of the downtown area. But that after that lease is up in 2026, there's 5 2-year rolling extension options. You basically start getting into the negotiation period for all that and how that all is going to look in the next 5 to 6 years. You are picking a potential quarterback of the future next year that will set you back about 5 years if you blow it, right? I mean, that's what happens.
Well, Cincinnati's very familiar with that, right? With the Achilles Smiths and
Well, the 90s, that's what the 90s were, and until they got Carson Palmer in '03 when Marvin came, then it straightened the ship back out. But if you miss that, if you don't get that one right, suddenly this city and team that have a complete disconnect. There were 25,000 empty seats at the game against Arizona on Sunday. That are completely disconnected. Well, starting into this renegotiate whatever it's going to be about whether to continue to stay here or what the lease looks like going forward. And with the Bengals having no leverage, the city not wanting them, they have to win, and they have to win pretty big in the next 5 to 6 years in order for this city to want them to stick around and continue to welcome them around here. That's the way it looks like. And so that will come down to probably who that quarterback is. Some dude currently in college, and that is a crazy thought. But that's what's on Zach Taylor. That's what's on whoever that quarterback's going to be, and that's on whatever this rebuild that they have to do now ends up looking like.
See, I don't think it's like Adley Rushman, who, by the way, was the number one pick in the draft last year, that he is going to be the franchise savior here, because I've seen Matt Wieters and Adam Jones, and like I've seen all that Buck show, I've seen all that happen, and then the aftermath is nobody comes anymore, right? And you're in a place where baseball's always – Pete Rose is like as innocent as Donald Trump is there, right? Like, it's just, he's innocent. He was never up on the hill. He never gambled. He's Pete Rose. They named roads after him. I've walked on them and drank in front of them and stuff. So baseball's still this sort of revered, weird thing there. I've been there on bobblehead nights. You know of my affinity for the Conies, and I do love sitting in the ballpark there and all that stuff. But then the question is, like, you're this place stuck between Kentucky and Ohio, and you're not Mexico City, and you don't have 14 million residents, and maybe you're a one-sport town like St. Louis is, like Portland is, or whatever. And Baltimore has that going on a little bit too with the baseball team and the football team, because you know it, I know it, the people know it, Paul. The Ravens were an incredible political machine to ever have happened, because the NFL never, ever wanted to put a team here because it was sort of Washington's turf. And now the baseball things happen the other way. These towns that aren't growing, right? That aren't getting bigger and richer, they're going to have a hard time holding on to 2 franchises, 3 franchises. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Well, I mean, certainly holding on to an NFL franchise, because with the dynamics of the NFL and all the stadiums and all the big markets and the NFL's desire to push internationally, it does squeeze out the smaller markets that have been maybe a part of this for a long time. I mean, that's just the direction that it's going. It does become harder for those teams. But it's just because it needs to be such a behemoth. And that's part of the going to be part of the equation here too. And again, we're talking about probably 10 years down, maybe a little less down the line when something like that would actually happen. But those wheels start to, it's like anything. And I mean, when you get into the political realm here, those wheels start moving far, far, far before any action actually happens. And that's what the Bengals are approaching, just because the lack of a playoff, this is a city. It's not just the Bengals. You can throw in the Reds. They now have an MLS team that's terrible. They have not won, and they haven't had a winning season by any team in this city, any professional team since 2015. They haven't had a playoff series, or in the case of like the Bengals, a single game win for any professional team in this city since 1995. So that is a long drought and a lot of disaffection that becomes created and bubbles up to where people are just like, you know what, enough. We're not going to deal with this. We feel like there's so many other great things going on in the city. The rest of the city is vibrant and growing and bustling. And then you have, this sports scene that has just become abysmal, and they're just looking for anybody to come in and sort of be the savior. And there was hope that maybe it was Zach Taylor, but now I guess that hope is that it's whoever they're going to draft next year.
Well, Paul Dehner Jr. joining us here. He's senior writer, podcast host. He's at The Athletic in Cincinnati, where I tell Zuri Beck I'm a subscriber now. So, you guys got my $36 or whatnot. So I'm down and on the app and all that stuff. But, talking about this, because I didn't know we'll get into the team for 5 minutes, and an 0-5 team, and, how they're going to stop the run and all that stuff. But while we're on this, because I've been banging this around with Angelos here, you sort of knew San Diego was percolating 25 years. I'm watching the Tampa Rays, and my wife and I are watching Game 4, and the upper deck's a sea of empty blue seats, same as it was 13 years ago. 13 years ago, my wife and I jumped in the car. No, 2008, so it was 11 years ago. My wife and I jumped in the car after a Miami Dolphin game, drove 4 hours to Game 7 in Tampa for a Rays-Red Sox. My wife's a Red Sox fan. Game 7 of the ALCS, paid $20 to get in. Last night, those seats were all empty. It's really incredible. You say, well, maybe the Rays will move to Montreal. Maybe the A's will move to Vegas. Whatever's going to happen. Maybe the Orioles will move to Nashville. And you'd say, well, Camden Yards, you'd like, well, when's the last time you saw people in it? All you remember is no one ever being there, like the Montreal Expos. And then I think about the Bengals, right? I mean, I've known you, going on 2 decades, and I've been coming to Cincinnati since 96. And, sure, there was that one Monday night when Todd Heap caught a ball and the place was a little crazy. But I mainly think of it being sort of empty and lonely, and it's a beautiful stadium. I was there the night it opened with Peter Warwick, drafted in preseason football, coming into town with my kid to see Jimmy Buffett and Pearl Jam out at the shed playing out on the Riverside when my kid was 14 years old. It's crazy to think that the stadium's now old, and you're talking about all of this stuff, but there really is sort of this. It's been a long time coming for the Bengals, back to firepaulbrown.com and all that other stuff, that if 10 years from now nobody's there, Frankfurt's calling, London's calling, Barcelona.
Yeah.
You're not competing with Memphis anymore or Jacksonville. No. You're competing with like cities of 10 million people where, as we're finding with the NBA in China this week, right? All they smell is money and new eyeballs, where the Bengals are a fresh new brand in Frankfurt in 2028, right?
And they're not only a fresh new brand. I mean, they already have some built-in following, depending on where you're going. I mean, there's there's none of that old junk that resides in the city of animosity about the worst lease in sports history and all that stuff, all the losing seasons that doesn't exist wherever they would go next, if that would be somewhere else. I mean, it would be a clean slate for them where they're actually liked in their own city. It's one of the rare things where there's no buzz, there's no people wearing Bengals gear around, there's no like excitement about a football team. It's just mostly embarrassment. And that's just from 4 years. I mean, they're coming off the winningest run that they've had in their history from 11 to 15 when Marvin took them to 5 straight playoffs. They lost all of them.
By the way, you're telling me the same story of the Orioles. The Orioles were really good for 5 years, and people sort of cared a little bit, and it was good, and it was sort of kind of full, but not really full. Not Cardinal or Cubs or Red Sox or Yankees full. It just was sort of full for the weekend, and now there's the aftermath of, hey, we lost 108 games on top of 100. You know what I mean? And I don't know where the light at the end of it. You could tell me Zach's a genius or Mike Elias is a genius or Adley Rushman or your next quarterback is going to save the franchise. But, man, at some point people have to really love and care, have that Bengals lights up at the holidays, And, we're losing that feeling for the football team here, dude, right? I mean, you've come in here. You're going to see empty seats this week, brother. You are. Believe me, you are.
Yeah. It's hard to do. I mean, the mid, it can happen. I mean, shoot. I mean, you can't be lower than the Bengals were before Marvin came, and then it was 3 years later, and it was maybe the most love between a city and a sports team. And I'll put that up against any of the Big Red Machine years, even that the city's probably ever seen was in 2005 when they had Chad Johnson, Hushmanzada, and Carson Palmer, and everybody loved them. I mean, I actually went out and did a story on like the endangered species of the Bengals diehard fan this weekend, and it was why because people, the one thing that they have to deal with is people constantly asking them why do they come to games, right? And the people I talked to, I asked all of them, their season ticket holders, when did they start? Almost everybody. 05. Like everybody.
Oh, okay.
They sold out the stadium for 4 straight years because of those years. Because of those, the thought of we got the coach and the quarterback and we're relevant. This team.
I have an in Marvin we trust shirt, Paul.
This city loves football, man. They have one of the greatest high school football scenes around. They love football like no other. It's still at its core. It's Ohio. It's football. And when the Bengals are going good, when they do it right, when you have a run, it embraces it, and it almost really kind of dwarfs the idea of this being a baseball town. When both are good, when all things are equal and both are winning, the Bengals might have bigger following when they're as far as filling the stadium and pure fervor for them. But which is a wild thought, but that's just kind of the case. But they're just so often the Bengals aren't going good. We just haven't seen that. So it's a really interesting scenario. But I guess the bottom line for this weekend is The Bengals are not very good right now, and the chances of them coming into Baltimore and winning are fairly slim.
I'm Paul Dehner Jr. joining us here, senior writer for The Athletic. All right, so let's get to the part of the program where you do tell me about your football team, and I'll try to tell you about mine. We're 5 weeks in. We have no idea what the hell we have. We're going to play without Tony Jefferson now. Secondary's banged up. They're waiting on Jimmy Smith. We're staring down a 3,000-mile road trip next week to Russell Wilson, a bye, and then Tom Brady's coming in. But nobody's running away, and the Browns went nighty-night on Monday night after just beating our asses last week. It feels like on our side there's some hope that 10 wins could win the division, kind of maybe going away at this point if you win the right games, even after losing to Cleveland. But, man, I saw Cincinnati play against Pittsburgh last week, and it looks this side of AAA, this side of where we beat Miami 59-10.
Yeah, that Pittsburgh game was a total disaster. I'm sure for most that's the only game they've seen of the Bengals this year. The Bengals have been in most games. They got housed by San Francisco, but I think a lot of people, it appears, are going to get housed by San Francisco this year. It's a really good team. But outside of that, they should have won in Seattle in the opener. They were driving to win and got picked off in the red zone to beat Buffalo in Buffalo when Buffalo was undefeated, and they got a field goal by Arizona at the gun to beat them at home this past week. So it's not like they're not competitive. It's not like every game has looked like that Pittsburgh game on Monday night was turned into a buzzsaw.
Yeah, they could be 2-3 with a break, right? Literally.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, they outgained Seattle by 200 yards. It's almost impossible to lose when you do that. But they had three dumb mistakes in the red zone that killed them getting points, where they 3 times came away with no points down there and lost by one. You see glimpses of it from this team, but the inconsistency, the long droughts. It's a coaching staff trying to figure out what it should look like and who should be playing and what pieces won't fit, and the offensive line being a disaster. You throw all those things together, and you get what they are right now. They're 0-5. And they're 0-5 with like a couple moral victories, if that does anything for anybody.
But they've been dangerous on a couple of weekends. What would make them dangerous this week? I mean, obviously the Ravens' pass rush has not been incredible, so you got that happening. The run stop without Brandon Williams wasn't so great. With him back, it is improved. But I would think if the Bengals can get after it a little bit there on that side of the ball, defensively, I see names I recognize. But you recognize Suggs the last couple of years, and it wasn't the same guy you remember 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you hear Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap, you think about 2012 Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap. This is, we're in 2019 now. These are guys in their 30s. They've crossed the 30 wall. They're not as effective as they used to be. While fine players, they're not the dominant forces that they used to be. They're much more dependent now on some of their young pass rushers, Sam Hubbard, Carl Lawson, some of their recent draft picks coming off the edges. The problem in this game is going to be that you have the league's worst rush defense against the league's best rush offense. The Bengals have not contained scrambling quarterbacks. So, if Lamar wants to take off, he can. And obviously we know how Baltimore can shove it down their throats. They did to the Bengals last year in the Jackson debut game. And, it's for the taking. And if they can do that, if that turns into, we've seen twice now the Bengals have given up over 250 yards on the ground alone. And if Baltimore wants to come out and do that, they probably can. And if they do choose to do that, they probably win.
It's interesting, man, because they haven't chosen to really be that team in the way they were like bumper cars last year. Ingram's changed this thing. Clearly, they want to throw. You know what I mean? Lamar drops back to look for tight ends and he wasn't doing any of that last year. It was literally snap, move left, fake, move, usually run into traffic, usually get tackled. A lot of that's gone away. It looks different now how they're going to have success this way. They had instant success the old way because nobody could figure it out. Now, to your point, you match up against Kansas City, you match up against some of these teams. You have to do things differently. But if you can go bumper cars and just win and have 13-play drives, like they did last year, then why not do it that way? Certainly would ease them off because the defense isn't as good this year, and the defense is getting gimpier. I mean, they brought Josh Bynes in off the street on Tuesday and started him 40 snaps on Sunday, Paul. I mean, veteran player, a guy that Harbaugh knows, a guy that was on our Super Bowl team. But still, I mean, no one does that in this league in 2019.
No, the Bengals do. They picked up a guy, Leroy Reynolds, week 1 or 2, and he's out there playing a bunch of key snaps for them and had a blown coverage that helped seal their fate against Buffalo. I mean, they've lost 3 of their top 4 receivers: A.J. Green, John Ross, Alex Erickson went out last week. All out. You won't see them this weekend. And I know Ravens fans know Tyler Boyd, but
he's pretty good, huh?
He's pretty good. He's been really good. He got an extension. He earned it. He's one of the few guys. Like the Bengals just need so many more Tyler Boyd. They need so many more guys that drafted, came into their own, and earned the right to a big new contract that he's got. They want to pay guys because they're all, they're very similar to Baltimore, and there's the draft develop retain mentality is really the lifeblood of the franchise here more so than ever anywhere else. And they honestly don't have guys to pay. Like, they don't have guys that have developed to be good enough to be worthy of paying like a top 5 player in the league. And that's the problem. That's where your roster is. And that's why they end up paying. Get this, Nestor. 5 of their top 6 cap hits this year are 30 years of age or older. I mean, their core is all in the decline. You're talking about guys like, and one of them that's not is Cordy Glenn, who isn't playing because of concussion and has had injury history all the last 3 years. That all their guys that they depend on are in their 30s, on the downside, regressing and getting hurt more often. Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, A.J. Green, Andy Dalton, Cordy Glenn, all of these
the guys that would come in here in December and wreck my Christmas, basically, right?
5 years ago, yes. and you can't hold on to that in this league. You can't hold on to that. You can't think that science is suddenly going to be different and guys are just suddenly going to start playing great non-quarterback division into their 30s.
Well, dude, you're coming in here. There's no Suggs, no Flacco, no Weddle, no Mosley. I mean, we did sort of the same thing around here,
And you become better off for it eventually because you have to look. This league is defined by 3 things: your quarterback, your coach, and your young drafted core. That's who you are. You are those guys on their rookie deals. Are they overperforming? Because everybody else pays the same level of talent guys on their second contracts. The real depth, the real good rosters, the real teams that make a difference and play into December and January are the ones that have drafted well in the last 3 years or 4 years and have all this talent on rookie deals and a good quarterback. And if you don't have that, you're toast. And we're seeing that now, especially if your quarterback is not great, which the Bengals have had to have that great rookie class in order to help elevate Andy Dalton to a level where he can win games for you, which he did early in his career. They haven't had the players around him late in his career, and that's why it's looked like this.
Well, I remember we used to look at Shane Graham and say, why can't we have the best kicker? We at least have the best kicker here now, so at least we have that going for us. Paul Dehner Jr., all right, last thing before I let you go, because we'll get a crab cake. I'll make sure you don't get a tourist crab cake when you're in here. Anything to say on Perfect, just because you were around it longer than anybody else? And I don't know if you've been asked about it or whatever, because it's sort of out of sight, out of mind, but it is something I'd like to...
that I don't get asked about him much anymore. It's refreshing. One of my favorite days I've ever had on this beat was a couple of days after I wrote my last Perfect story when he moved on and was let go. I could finally delete the file of Vontaze Burfict fines and suspensions that I keep. Because you always every time he would get a new one, you have to tweet out the new total, the new list, how many games, $6 million given up. You
always had to keep it on the front of your desktop so you could find it, right?
Oh yeah, no, that wasn't in a folder. That was on the desktop. I didn't put it in the Bengals folder. I just left it out there so I knew I could find it quickly.
It's like mine that says Angelos. It's always out on the front of my desktop.
This was always how this was going to end, Nestor. Like, this was going to end one of 2 ways. Either concussed into oblivion, his degenerative hip condition finally doing him in, or just suspended forever. Like there was no other way. There was no reclamation project that was going to happen with Vontaze Burfict as much as Paul Gunther wanted there to be.
It was like a wrestling match where the loser had to leave town or something. Literally, it feels that way to me.
Oh, it's like the end of Hell in a Cell or something. Like everybody's bleeding and can barely walk anymore. There's just no. This is what he is. This is what he always was going to be on the football field. And you may laud his intelligence as a player. That this type of stuff is his defining characteristic. He does not have the ability to turn it off. He and part of that is you can use the word enabler. You can throw everybody else under the bus you want to. It all comes back to one guy being unable to turn that part of his personality off when he's on the field, and that's what this looks like. It looks like that ridiculous hit on Jack Doyle and all the other stuff that I've watched go down over the years, and this is how it ends. This is how it was meant to end because it's the only way it could.
All right, I hope you don't get asked about it again, but you will because you covered it more than anybody else. Paul Dehner Jr. joining us here from The Athletic in Cincinnati. He's going to bring me some of that chili with the cinnamon stuff in it that gives me indigestion, and if not, he'll give me indigestion when I come in there next month. So, hey, take care. We'll see you Sunday at the ballpark, man. Thanks for coming on.
All right, see you, Nestor.
Always making the show better, Paul Dehner Jr., senior writer, podcast host, covering the Bengals and more. Apparently sings karaoke. Maybe we could work on some Cars songs on Saturday and have a Cars sing-along somewhere over in Dundalk or something like that. Also, a cornhole aficionado. I want to make sure I point that out for Paul. You can find me nasty at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, Baltimore Positive, and anywhere the Ravens are in Owings Mills. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.